This is my 2013 Wheego LiFe. I've owned this electric car for over 2 years now, so I feel qualified to give you an in-depth review of this car. Likely the most in-depth review of a Wheego on the whole of the internet, as if anyone asked for such a thing. Unfortunately, I've owned this car for so long that I've become deeply familiar with it, which has left me unable to describe it in a manner brief enough to adequately sum up my thoughts on this car for this review's introduction. Oh look, a pile of trash. I'm sure that's completely unrelated. No comprehensive review would be complete without the basic specs of the car, so here's that. The battery pack is a 115 volt 30 kilowatt hour pack made up of 36 lithium iron phosphate cells from which the car derives its LiFe name, for lithium iron. This gives the car a supposed range of 100 miles. I actually tested the range once and got 86 miles out of it going at highway speeds with the air conditioner turned to full blast. So 100 miles does seem doable if you take it a little easier than I did. The asynchronous induction motor drives the front wheels through a single-speed gear reduction box and is rated at 60 horsepower and 95 pound-feet of torque. The top speed of this car is electronically limited to 65 miles per hour or 105 kilometers per hour. The whole car weighs 2,660 pounds or 1,200 kilograms. And although I haven't verified this, apparently the battery pack alone makes up over 1,000 pounds of that weight. Lithium iron phosphate cells are very safe and stable, but they're not especially power dense. This is the Wheego LiFe. It's important to note that this is one of 2 models that Wheego, a company based in Atlanta, Georgia, made. The other model was called the Whip. The Whip was the same basic car as the LiFe, except it had lead-acid batteries, a much weaker motor, less than half the range this does, slightly different trimming and different headlights, and it was only capable of speeds up to 25 miles per hour, depending on local laws. It was sold as a low-speed vehicle or neighborhood EV. Being classified as a low-speed vehicle meant they didn't have to meet nearly as many DOT regulations, so they could go ahead, skip that expensive part of the development process, sell cars early, and use that car sales money to fund the development of their high-speed car that did have to meet all of those DOT and safety regulations. That high-speed car they were developing was this, the Wheego LiFe. Wheego sold Whips starting in 2009, and they sold LiFes from 2011 to 2013. All totaled, Wheego made around 300 Whips and just under 100 LiFes. That means this Wheego LiFe is rarer than a Bugatti Veyron, or a Saab 9-4X, or a Bugatti EB110, or a Jag XG220. Really, the list goes on. This is an extraordinarily rare car. But that's enough with the boring specifications and history. It's time to tell you about all the benefits this little electric car has to offer. First and foremost, this car is good for the environment. Now obviously, since it's an electric car, it doesn't burn any gas and therefore doesn't produce any direct tailpipe emissions. But also, if your power comes from a renewable energy source such as hydro or solar, powering this car creates no pollution at all. The car even comes with this handy power consumption graph in the shape of some trees, so you can always tell just how environmentally friendly you're being at any given point while you're driving. With a range of just under 100 miles, it has more than enough range to keep your anxiety at bay. Sure, it may not have enough range to be your only car, but it's certainly adequate to be an urban runabout, or a grocery getter, or a commuter car. Shoot, even a modern smart EQ only has a range of 60 miles. It's an electric car, so your general maintenance on this thing is going to be drastically reduced over a combustion-powered car, because you don't have to do things like oil changes. And your brake pads will last a lot longer than they would on a combustion-powered car, because the Wheego, like most electric cars, has regenerative braking, which uses the motor as a generator when you let off the go pedal to reduce speed in the car and charge the batteries a little bit. It is a usable car. It has 2 seats and a decent amount of cargo space in the back given its diminutive size. It certainly has more cargo space than the comparatively sized Smart 4.2. The passenger seat even has mounting points for a child's car seat and the ability to disable the airbag, so you can haul one of those tiny dumb people if you so choose. Unlike the Wheego Whip, this is a highway-capable vehicle, so there's no road that's off limits. There may not be any cruise control, but the top speed is electronically limited to 65 miles an hour, so you can cruise on the highway all day happily with your foot welded to the floor and never worry about breaking the speed limit. Unless the speed limit's 55, of course. It has 3 different drive modes that allow you to optimize your driving experience. Leave the shifter in drive for normal mode and you get the medium selection of accelerative ability and the minimal amount of regen braking. Pressing the Eco button to the right of the shifter to activate economy mode, and you get slightly reduced accelerative ability and maximized regen to prolong the life of your battery. Put the shifter one notch down into S for sport mode, and you get maximized accelerative ability and minimal regen braking. But hang on, I'm not done. Unlike most other cars, the Wheego can be in sport mode and Eco mode at the same time. It's just a matter of putting the shifter into the S position while having the Eco button pressed in. This gives the car maximized acceleration and maximized regen. And since I like both of those things to be maximized, this is how I choose to drive my Wheego most of the time. It has such modern conveniences as air conditioning, AM/FM radio, power windows, power mirrors, power locks with remote entry, tire pressure monitoring, and a digital dash that shows you the amp draw or gain on the battery, the state of charge, the battery voltage, your current power consumption, and your current speed. It has safety features like dual airbags, anti-lock brakes, and four-wheel disc brakes. Overall, the Wheego is a usable electric city car with adequate range and enough features to keep the average car buyer satisfied in daily use. It's an interesting prospect on paper. It's just too bad the whole car is an atrocious pile of garbage and easily the worst new production car sold in the United States in the past decade, maybe even the past 2 decades. Allow me to explain. Let's start with the origins of the car's body. Wheego was a small cash-strapped car maker. They didn't have the resources to design and build an entire car from scratch. So they bought the body shell from an existing car manufacturer, much like Tesla did with the original Roadster when they bought the body shells from Lotus. Now this can be a fine approach, but the manufacturer Wheego bought from was Chinese car maker Shuanghuan. And the body they picked was that of the Shuanghuan Noble, a car known the world over for being a Chinese copy of this, a first-generation Smart 4.2. I've already done an in-depth video showing the similarities between these two cars that you can watch here, so I'll move on. Aside from being a blatant rip-off of another car, the Noble body shell has another problem. It has the build quality of a middle school shop project. It's absurd how badly this thing is made. You don't even have to get in the car to start seeing issues. These lenses up here in the headlight assembly are already cloudy. They got this way in just a couple of years. This one used to be completely clear. This hatch? Yeah, it's on crooked. It even hits the taillight in this corner. By the way, the taillights are also cloudy. Not quite as bad as the front lenses, but they're still noticeably cloudy. There's some weird paint imperfections like this spot here that's sort of a lighter blue than the surrounding area. This is much harder to notice, but the left and right sides of the car, they don't match. The body panels are slightly different on either side. It may be hard to see on camera, but the left side has this curvature going into the rear window that just doesn't exist on the right side of the car. And this door? Yeah, it doesn't seal properly. You can even see through the window here that the seal isn't even touching the door. It does on the other side, but this door says, no, you're gonna get wet in that car wash. Water gonna come in? Oh yeah, there's the water coming in. Oh, it gets sprayed. The bottom of the doors don't seal well either. They let in a sizable draft when you're going down the highway from both doors. Surprisingly though, the panel gaps around the doors and indeed around the whole car is actually, they're pretty decent. You can see here that it's even all the way to the bottom of the door. It's the same way for most of the rest of the car. But that's just the exterior. What about the interior? Auto journalists like to complain if a car they're reviewing has hard, cheap plastics making up bits of the interior because it gives the car a cheapish feeling, a feeling of cost cutting. Well friends, let me tell you, the Wheego's interior takes that cheap feeling to a whole new level. Not only is every bit of this interior made of cheap, horrible to touch plastics, it's also all falling apart. Every bit of this interior is either warped, broken, falling apart, or ill-fitting in some way. And I do mean all of it. For some examples, the dash is cracking already. This whole area is massively warped. The holder for this vent is warped so much that it's just falling out. What's even going on with this area? And I could go on like this for quite some time. So I will. Here's your full tour of the interior. It all starts to go wrong the instant you get in the car once your buttocks graze the work truck grade vinyl seats that have all the comfort and ergonomics of an upturned bucket wrapped in a blanket. And on top of being not very comfortable, they're also tearing already. The next thing you want to do is reach for your seat belt. This is when you'll discover it's about a foot further back than it should be, causing you to have to contort yourself just to be able to reach the stupid thing. Already the lack of attention to detail is starting to show. Moving to the dash, I'll start with the climate controls. It's just 3 knobs and a slider. The center knob is also a button that switches between the heat and air conditioning. Fine, right? Well, no, the knobs feel cheap, which is a small issue. But what isn't a small issue are these labels around the knobs. For whatever reason, these labels are printed in a recess around the knobs. This means you can't see what's printed on most of the labels unless you look at the knobs from dead on. You can't see most of this labeling from any other angle, including your seating position, which is annoying. Just below the climate controls is the radio. This is just some cheap radio they bought off the shelf, and it's what came installed in the Wheego from the factory. It's a total afterthought. Just below the radio is a blank switch, a power outlet, and the rear window defroster switch. Just above the climate control knobs is one of 3 climate control vents in the dash, and just above that is this tray. This tray insert and this screw cap and this whole surrounding area are quite badly warped from the sun, and it was like this when I got the car 2 years ago. Down to the left of the steering column is the fog light switch. It's surrounded by this incredibly warped piece of plastic that likes to fall off all the time. The Wheego does not have a glove box, but it does have this nice curved piece of plastic that is completely hollow and serves no purpose other than to ape the appearance of the dash in the smart car. Just below that is the airbag. On the steering wheel, there's 2 horn buttons, one on either side, and an airbag in the middle. The stalk to the left of the wheel controls the blinkers and the lights. The stalk on the right controls the wiper functions. Pretty standard stuff, except the rubber boot at the base of both of these stalks is almost completely disintegrated. The steering wheel cover doesn't fit right at all. And the plastic surrounding the airbag on the steering wheel is quite visibly warped. Between the 2 gray vinyl seats is the center console. In this center console there are 3 cup holders, 2 of which are too small to be used for most drinks, the handbrake, the shifter, and the 4-way navigation switch for navigating the digital dash. More on that switch in a second. The shifter is of particular interest to me because of how clearly Wheego modified it. They took the shifter from the Noble, which is just a typical looking automatic shifter, and they covered up the last 2 numbers with what looks like tape. They only needed the shifter positions for drive and sport, so they just blocked off the rest. Also, the position for sport says the number 2 instead of S because reusing one of the old inserts was much easier than making a new insert that has the letter S on it. Oh, and the Eco button is just the transmission hold button from the Noble that they repurposed and slapped an E sticker over. That's peeling off. Also, this button does like to get wedged under the trim around it. This is a production car, ladies and gentlemen, not a prototype. This is the cargo area behind the seats. There's nothing especially interesting back here except this lid for this tray has completely fallen off its hinges because it's made of particle board and the screw stripped out of it. Also, the reason this area is so big is because the Noble was originally a 4-seat car, so there would have been back seats back here. On the driver's side door, there's this control pod for operating the power mirrors, power windows, and power locks. The passenger side door just has the window control. If you're wondering what the key fob looks like, here it is. It also feels cheap. One annoyance with this key fob is that the Wheego's horn honks at full volume if you either lock or unlock the car. Now, most cars have some sort of little beep or honk or some sort of confirmation sound to let you know you've performed an action on the key, but the Wheego's horn honks at full volume with any of these actions, which is incredibly annoying and scares little old ladies that happen to be walking near the car at the time. Speaking of annoying sounds, the Wheego wants to make absolutely sure you don't leave your lights on when you get out of the car. If you do leave your lights on, this is the racket it makes. Now, making some sort of alarm sound to tell you you've left your lights on is a pretty normal car thing to do, but the Wheego sound is especially annoying. Everything I've shown you so far, aside from the radio, can be found in a standard Shuanghuan Noble. What can't be found in a Noble, however, is this digital gauge cluster that was custom made by Wheego for this car. I've already shown you the basic functions this thing has, but what I didn't show you are its flaws. The first of which is that power consumption graph. It's laughable it's in the shape of some trees, but that's not the issue. The issue is the unit displayed next to the number at the top, W/M. W/M seems like it would be suggesting watts per meter, but that's a nonsensical unit of measurement. That's like saying horsepower per feet. It just doesn't make any sense. If we assume instead that it's supposed to say watt hours per meter, then it still doesn't make any sense. If the power consumption graph thingy says 300, which it regularly does, and we assume the unit is watt hours per meter, that would mean I would burn through the car's entire 30 kilowatt hour battery pack in just 100 meters. So clearly, instead of saying watts per meter, it should say watt hours per mile, and the person that programmed that digital dash had no idea how to abbreviate units properly. The next problem with this screen comes when you try to navigate into the user settings. There really isn't much to do in here other than little stuff like change the time, which, by the way, you have to do fairly often because the clock drifts by about 20 minutes per month. You navigate this screen with the 4-way switch in the center console I mentioned earlier. The first problem is that the up and down buttons scroll the exact opposite direction you would expect them to do, so you have to sort of retrain your brain just to scroll up and down. The second problem is that this button constantly gets wedged under the trim surrounding it, which causes it to get stuck and infinitely scroll. So navigating this simple screen is a massive pain because the arrow keys are awful. They also just feel chintzy. And that pretty much covers the entirety of the interior. Did you notice anything? Or rather, did you notice a lack of anything? It's missing a large array of features. It doesn't have Bluetooth. It doesn't have cruise control. The steering wheel doesn't tilt. It doesn't have power seats. It doesn't even have cloth on the seats. It's missing some pretty basic features for a car of this price bracket. And it's even missing some safety features as well. This is a car from 2013 with no traction control or stability control. And stability control was a mandatory safety item in 2013. So how did Wheego manage to leave that off? Well, they got a federal safety exemption, of course, for the stability control and the airbags. Now, it does have airbags, but they're the simple kind of airbags rather than the more advanced kind of airbags that were required by safety regulations. And my airbag light is on, so it's likely I have no airbags at all. But that's just my car, or 1% of the total production of LiFes. So that's your in-depth look at the Wheego's interior. It's awful to look at, awful to touch. It smells a bit cancery, and it doesn't have much in the way of features. Everything I've shown you so far screams early prototype at best or cheap garbage at worst. But most of that stuff is somewhat superficial. What about the driving experience of the car? Can the way this car drives garner it some much needed redemption points? Well, not really. The driving experience is also disappointing. Let's start with the power. There isn't enough of it. That's why I leave this thing in sport mode all the time, because I need every last bit of power it has to offer. This is a very slow car. But how about instead of just telling you it's not fast, I show you some cold hard numbers to give you a real sense of how truly not fast it is. I took several of the vehicles from my fleet out to the same flat and level stretch of highway for some 0 to 60 runs. These times represent the best of 3 runs from each car. A better driver could have probably knocked off a second of each of these times, but they're just for comparison's sake anyway, so it doesn't really matter. How long do you think it took the Wheego in sport mode to achieve 60 miles per hour? It took 18 seconds. It took the Wheego 18 seconds to get to 60 miles per hour in sport mode. And remember, that's the best of 3 runs. The other 2 runs were 19 seconds and 20 seconds. I guess the battery started heating up or something. Maybe it got tired. Also, just for funsies, I did a 0 to 60 run in eco mode, just 1 run, and it took the Wheego 25 seconds to get to 60 miles per hour in eco mode. So basically, half a minute. So yeah, this is not a very quick car, but weirdly it doesn't feel dangerously slow most of the time. This thing has a bit of an odd acceleration curve to it. It only feels inadequate off the line, or actually, you know what? How about instead of explaining it to you, I show you a graph. A proper acceleration graph would be denoted in units like meters per second, or something like that. Unfortunately, I don't have the equipment necessary to measure such things, so I'm going to be plotting the acceleration of the Wheego in terms of feel on a scale from, is that it, to, oh, that's nippy, and we'll start out, rather obviously, at 0 miles an hour. Now, unlike most electric cars, the Wheego feels like it has nothing at all off the line. It feels a lot more like an electric golf cart than it does a highway-capable electric car, which is what it is. And that trend continues until about 15 miles an hour, where things improve dramatically, because this is the beginning of the sweet spot. The sweet spot of the Wheego's acceleration is from about 15 to 30 miles an hour. In this range, it actually feels nippy. If you hit the throttle, it'll actually give you a little bit of kick. It feels like a proper electric car. A slightly weak electric car, but it feels like a proper electric car, and it's actually kind of fun to drive in this range. Unfortunately, that feeling, it doesn't last long, and after about 35 miles an hour, things drop off significantly until you hit about 50 miles an hour, where it feels like it is not accelerating at all anymore. But it is accelerating. Unless there's a hill, you can still reach 60 miles an hour. It'll even go beyond 60 miles an hour to 65, where the limiter cuts in. It will do brief bouts of 70 miles an hour down hills before the limiter reins it back in, but 65 is the limit. So that's the acceleration curve of the Wheego and what it feels like to press the go pedal. nothing, 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 something, nothing, 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 nothing. It's the upper end of that acceleration curve that causes the real issue. This car has no grunt at all past about 50 miles per hour. Since it's electronically limited to 65, you might be fooled into thinking that it could do 80 or more if someone were just to remove that limiter and set it free. Well, no. It struggles hard as it is just to hit that 65 mile per hour top speed. If you hit even a slight hill, it'll drop down to 60. And I'm talking about a hill so slight that you'd think it was flat level ground until you got out and measured it with a level. And bigger hills, yeah, it'll quite easily drop down to 50. I once got in an uphill race with a loaded semi on the interstate and lost. And this can lead to troubles on the highway where, for instance, I pull out to pass someone who's doing 60 miles per hour, and then they speed up slightly, or we come upon a hill and I slow down slightly. Then inevitably someone's behind me in the passing lane trying to get around me, and I'm stuck there because I can't accelerate out of anyone's way, and I'm just sitting there making everyone mad. Yeah, okay, you probably get it by now. It doesn't do the power thing very well. But isn't there anything else I can talk about? After all, there's more to the driving experience than just power. Yes. How about we talk about how stinking loud it is in here? First of all, there's all of the wind noise. There's quite a bit of that going around. And that's partly because the body shell doesn't have much in the way of sound insulation, but also partly because the doors don't seal properly. So they let in a sizable draft, and in turn, all of the sounds of the outside world and the highway passing beneath you. Secondly, there's all the electric motor noise. Now, it's not particularly annoying, but for an electric motor, it's awfully loud. I mean, give it a listen. It whines constantly. Sometimes at highway speeds, it even sort of whistles, which is actually kind of adorable. Now, when asked about why the electric motor in this car is so loud, Mike McQuarrie, the CEO of Wheego, said, and I'm paraphrasing, that their customers wanted some feedback. They wanted some whir or sound on acceleration to give them a sense that something's happening, so they left that electric motor noise in by design. Right, and I suppose you ordered all the body shells with misaligned hatches because your customers wanted a sense of character too, right? In addition to all the noise and the slowness, the suspension is harsh and crashy. The brakes don't feel all that confidence-inspiring, although they are helped a little bit by the regen braking. And the steering feels vague and ponderous to the point of feeling dangerous at times. It doesn't feel like it would take much to destabilize this car. And remember, there's no traction control or stability control to save me or attempt to save me. It does have anti-lock brakes, but on multiple occasions, the ABS has disabled itself almost as soon as it was activated, causing my wheels to lock up and my sphincter to tighten. Okay, you probably get it by now. This thing is mediocre at best to drive on the highway, but that's not what this car was designed to do. It was designed as an electric city car. So how is it when you're just putting around town? Yeah, it's still a whole lot of not good, but you probably already saw that coming. When driving at slow speeds, the main problem is all the noises the car makes. But unlike when driving at highway speeds, it's not wind noise that's filling your ear holes. It's the various sounds of the car falling apart. Every time you accelerate, it sounds like the front suspension is trying to rip itself free from the car. Every time you hit a bump or undulation, all the interior bits sound like unoiled hinges and loose change. The air conditioner sounds like an air compressor that's stuck under the hood. It even makes this sort of weird grinding sound coming from the front suspension every time you slow down or brake with any force at all. All these noises are very unsettling. It makes the car feel like it's going to fall apart. It makes it feel like it's incredibly poorly made, which it is. There's also a problem with visibility. These A-pillars with their extra padding that's trying to fall off cause a blind spot big enough to block entire cars. This rearview mirror is pretty much directly at eye level, meaning the rearview mirror itself causes a pretty hefty blind spot, again big enough to block entire cars. And there's something about this seating position that's just a bit off. I don't know if it's too high or what, but the ceiling cuts into my field of view enough that I have to duck down to look at most stoplights. Again, most of these complaints are pretty minor, as a lot of modern cars are plagued with visibility issues like this, but I still felt like I should mention it. Also, the rear view mirror thing is kind of ridiculous. The last bad characteristic when putting around town is the steering wheel yank. Under acceleration, I have to provide a pretty hefty amount of correction into the steering wheel just to be able to stay in a straight line. This, combined with all the noises it makes the car feel especially flimsy. So you see what I mean? The driving experience of this car garners it no redemption points. If anything, driving it makes it seem even worse. The reality is, it drives a lot like it looks. Rather poorly. You may have noticed by this point that almost all of the problems I mentioned are the fault of the Shuanghuan Noble body shell that Wheego used for their car. Wheego did all the electrification and drivetrain stuff, and so far the only problems I pointed out with that stuff are some weird quirks in the digital dash and the fact that it doesn't have enough power. You might even be fooled into thinking, the reason that car turned out so bad is because Wheego used that Chinese car body, the Shanai Twain, or however you pronounce it. If Wheego would have just used a non-Chinese car body, they would have had a shot at making a half-decent car. Well, no. The entire car, including the bits Wheego did, was engineered and assembled with all the care and precision of an employee who's just found out his wife's cheating on him and he's going to be fired in 2 days. The quirky dash computer and the powerless motor are just two of the things I've told you about. What I haven't told you about goes much deeper. This is the battery pack under the Wheego. How did Wheego manage to cram a battery pack this large under a Chinese city car that was originally meant as a combustion-powered car? Simple, they just hacked away at the body shell until the battery pack fit in place. Naturally. I haven't seen this myself, but I talked to another Wheego LiFe owner, yes, they do exist, who has dropped the battery pack out of his car, and he said the body shell surrounding the battery pack is a murder scene of dull hacksaw marks and baby's first welds. He even said in several places it looks like they hacked straight through the unibody structure of the car just to fit this battery pack into place. You can even see a glimpse of that hack jobbery in the corner of the battery pack here, where they've clearly cut through the body shell with what looks like a plasma cutter and then tacked this metal piece into place. Very, very poorly. There's even welding wire sticking out on the other side of it. There's quite a few, let's say, interesting items under this car, so I've made a supplementary video touring the underside of this Wheego that you can watch here, after you finish watching this video, of course. Another thing I should mention about that other Wheego LiFe owner is that his Wheego is now dead. It died at just 17,000 miles because of a lovely design flaw on Wheego's part. So how did it die? His Wheego died because the spline shaft connecting the motor to the gearbox got completely stripped out. This is because the spline teeth on the male part of the connection coming out of the motor have a slightly different tooth pitch than the spline teeth on the female part of the connection going into the gearbox. This caused just a little bit of slop or play in that motor to gearbox connection, which caused the spline teeth to gradually wear down over time until eventually the spline teeth got so worn down that the whole connection got completely stripped out. So yeah, this isn't just a bad car because Wheego chose a crappy Chinese car body as the base. Wheego had a fair bit to play in making it a bad car as well. And you have to remember, Wheego consciously chose the Shuanghuan Noble body shell. It's not like it was forced on them. So yeah, I'm sure you get the point by now. The Wheego LiFe is not a very good car. So the question is, who bought these things new? Well, old people mostly. Retired individuals made up a large portion of the buyers for these cars. And it makes sense too. It's easy to maintain and you can charge it in your own garage or driveway. If you live in a retirement community where an LSV compliant golf cart is a legitimate option for a vehicle, this thing starts to look pretty tempting. And it's highway capable should you need to venture further than your local grocery store. Really, it's kind of the perfect retirement community car. For everyone else though, this thing makes no sense. It's a comfortable Chinese golf cart trying to make it as a car. And it wasn't cheap either. Wheego advertised a base MSRP of $33,000. But that's before you add in the optional equipment and destination charge. This one had a sticker price of $36,000. For this! Yes, there was a hefty tax incentive on top of that, but it'd still be too expensive. Fun fact about that optional equipment, the only option you could fit to a Wheego LiFe was air conditioning at a price of $2,000. While it's listed as an option, a guy at Wheego told me that no cars were produced without air conditioning. I suspect the only reason it was listed as an option at all was so they could lower the advertised base price a bit, which is a tiny bit slimy. Hold on though, let's take a step back. You may be thinking that I'm being far too harsh on Wheego. After all, starting a new car company is hard. Ridiculously hard. And Wheego was just a tiny American company with, according to the CEO in 2012, just 7.5 employees. You know, it's a small company if they hired half a person. And they developed this car on a budget of just $8 million. If that number doesn't mean anything to you, consider that last year, Tesla spent $4 million on research and development per day. When you look at Wheego's complete lack of staff and money, you can start to understand how the end product of their labor turned out so underdeveloped and bad. You can even start to forgive it a little. Besides, it's not like they were trying to compete with Tesla or anything. Except, that's not the vibe that was given off by Mike McQuarrie, the CEO of Wheego, at the LA Auto Show in 2010. That's the auto show where Wheego announced the LiFe. and I have some choice quotes from Mr. McQuarrie at that show. The first quote is as follows: "Nissan has a great car. Anyone considering an electric car should go consider a Nissan Leaf. If you don't mind your hard-earned yen, I mean dollars, going to a Japanese company." Yes, that's right. The CEO of the company that made this Chinese-bodied car pulled out his patriotism card and took a stab at Nissan for not being American. Sure, 73% of the parts in this car may be American as it claims on the window sticker, but the whole car body, i.e. everything you see, is Chinese. And if that stab at Nissan wasn't enough, he also took a potshot at Tesla while he was at it, saying, "Up until 2 years ago, I thought Elon Musk was a cologne I wore in college. Apparently, Elon Musk is a genius. I've never met him, so I'll just have to take his word for it. Also, unlike Tesla, we make affordable electric cars." Oh, come on, really? Your company produces a car that has the build quality and feel of a rough prototype or a home-built EV conversion, and you have the nerve to not only attack Tesla, but Elon Musk himself? How about you learn how to produce a proper car before you go around criticizing other automakers for anything? The Wheego looks like a toy in comparison to any other car. So yeah, I didn't take kindly to the CEO's attitude, as he was kind of a jerk. But that's enough of that. What about me? Why did I buy one of these things, and what has my ownership experience been like? Well, it should come as no surprise to you that I'm not normal. I was especially drawn to the Wheego because I knew it would be awful, which meant it would never fall short on entertainment value. Also, it was cheap. It was $36,000 when it was new, but I got it for $5 grand just 4 years later. When I bought it, it had 10,000 miles on it. Now it has 18,000 miles on it. Over the course of that 8,000 miles, I've actually thoroughly enjoyed this car. It might surprise you, but this is my go-to choice of vehicle for short trips. Yes, it's objectively awful, which is what I wanted to show you with this video, but subjectively, it's a lot of fun and I love it a whole lot. I like my little Wheego. Now, maybe I don't think it's fun for all the right reasons, but it always entertains me. For instance, before filming this video, I took it to a car wash, and I was excited to take it to the car wash. Not because my precious car was getting all cleaned up, but because the door doesn't seal properly and I knew I'd get wet from the car wash blasting through the door, and that's hilarious. And sure, it's been hideously unreliable for such a new electric car. It's even left me stranded a couple of times, which just shouldn't happen. But because that sort of thing doesn't bother me, it always makes me laugh and gives me a fun story to tell. This car is terrible, and that's what makes it so wonderful. Also, it's electric, so that's fun. So would I recommend you buy a Wheego LiFe? Of course not. Even if you did want to buy a used Wheego LiFe, good luck finding one. Porsche made 9 times more 918 Spyders than Wheego made Lifes. The only reason I found this one is because one of the dealerships that sold these things new was M&M Golf Carts, which happened to be in the town where I grew up of Mexico, Missouri. So there were a few in the area just floating around. So that's the Wheego LiFe. Hopefully I've answered every question you had about this car, and even some you didn't. I've been wanting to give this car the in-depth review treatment basically since I got it. Partly because it's hilarious, but also because who else is going to make the video? As far as YouTube goes, I've got the Wheego market covered. And that's it. You made it to the end of the video. Thank you to my supporters on Patreon for your continued support and in part allowing me to make this my longest scripted video to date. And to everyone else, including my Patreon supporters, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.